Hi, my name is Chris Dixon. This is Founder Stories. Today we have Kevin O'Connor, the co-founder and CEO of Find the Best, and also previously the co-founder of DoubleClick and involved with a lot of other interesting companies. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Chris.
So let's go back. So like in the early 90s, you were involved, I think you were, one of the companies you were involved with was called ISS, which people might not know if they aren't from the security world, but was a hugely successful security company. Eventually sold, I think, a couple of years ago to IBM for $1.6 billion. You were involved in the early stages of that, and can you tell us a little bit about that story of how that happened?
Yeah, so it was 1995. I was down in Atlanta. A company I had started earlier got acquired and brought me down there. And so I was looking for something to do. Well, I knew I wanted to do a startup, and I talked to a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know what, there's this kid in town, 20-year-old kid, dropped out of Georgia Tech, and he's got a pretty interesting product. I don't know much about it, but you should go talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
He needs someone, who's got some experience.
What was his name?
Isn't it Chris Klaus?
Okay.
And so Chris was, 20, dropped out of Georgia Tech. He was living with his grandmother, I think, at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I went and talked to him, and it turns out he had created an internet security scanner,
Mm-hmm.
and he had
So
sold.
this is a vulnerability scanner. So you scan someone's data center and you find the vulnerabilities or something.
Yes. So it scanned like every machine on the network to figure out how it's simulated how a robber would break into your house.
Okay.
So I talked to this kid. He had sold 10 copies for $10,000 to 10 Fortune 500 companies. I mean, it's unbelievable. So.
And how was he selling them?
Just talking to him. They had seen him at security conferences and.
I mean, was he like going and scanning and finding vulnerabilities, and then they would?
No.
Okay.
No. So right about the same time,
Okay.
we were talking earlier about competitors.
Mm-hmm.
This was an unknown market.
Mm-hmm.
Satan came out. I don't know if you remember Satan.
Yeah, I remember
right?
Satan.
I mean,
Yeah.
he was this
It
guy.
was like, wait, so Satan was? I thought that was an open source.
It was. It was
Okay.
open source scanner.
Yeah.
So now every bad guy on the internet had these.
Okay, so Satan was an open source scanner
probing.
for finding vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
and so that was the bad guys were using Satan to go and
Yes.
say, okay, these people left open this door, and we can enter there.
Exactly, and ours was so the better version of Satan, right? And difference in security if you're an investment bank or any kind of financial institution or the NSA, a difference between Satan, a decent scanner, and a really good scanner ISS had, it's worth a lot of money.
Okay, so you were a better scanner than Satan, and in order to prevent people from using Satan to then break
Beautiful.
in. Okay.
We couldn't have asked for it. I mean, we were really paranoid. We're like, oh my God, we're selling this thing for $10,000. A competitor comes in for free. How do you compete against that? Well, free, it's pretty tough to.
Mm-hmm.
How do you produce a good product for free?
Mm-hmm.
And I carried that lesson over to the internet. I remember the early days of the internet, right? The new economy crap that people were peddling.
Yeah.
That somehow that economic principles didn't apply anymore. And giving everything away for free would work. And you can't build businesses that way.
So wait, so basically, this was this brilliant techie. He had sort of sold a few things, but maybe didn't realize this could be $1 billion company.
Well, I don't think any of us realized it could be $1 billion company.
Okay.
I mean, I remember I tried selling the company to my old company for $20 million.
Okay.
We thought they thought it was too much. We thought we had a pretty interesting product, pretty important product. I mean, the internet is still the early days of the internet. A lot of companies still weren't connected to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So no one really, we knew it could be important, but no one ever realized.
But then, was there sort of at some point like an inflection point where it just sort of took off, or
it was the inflection point of the internet.
Okay,
Right,
so once the internet happened, everyone was connected, and they're like, okay, we need to scan stuff, and you were
exactly, and everyone, I mean, you got to see what was happening to corporations when they hooked up to the internet. Banks were being probed 10,000 times a month. I mean, they're just under constant attack. And a lot of bad stuff was happening. I mean, every day.
Yeah.
On the front page, you see some security group breaks into the UN or.
So I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of people have there's sort of this myth that like startups, like you're YouTube and you just launch the product and it kind of goes along, and then suddenly it's just like a hockey stick or whatever. But I think with my experience with a lot of tech companies is like you're kind of going along, and then some external thing happens, like beyond your control, like the internet comes along, and then suddenly you ride that wave or something. It sounds like that was one of those stories. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick of startups, right? Usually disjoints happen when some big technology wave is on its way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My first company was happened right when the personal computer, 1983.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 100 companies that I called said there's no way a personal computer will ever come into our business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, a year later, they're calling us saying, people were buying these things as calculators. They were getting them into the business because they needed them. So, but you don't want to get too early, right? So if you start those companies, and the same thing with the internet. I mean, back in 1995, there was, I don't know how many people.
Yeah.
Very few people,